Hi there, this is Lloyd again for AE Tuts. In this tutorial, I'll show you guys a great new plugin that just got released. It adds in my opinion, a massive functionality that's been missing from After Effects, which has always been around in Flame, the Autodesk Flame systems, which is to be able to bend a layer in 3D. And there's been other plugins that have kind of been sort of similar in some sort of way or another, but this is the first one that really functions in a true bicubic manner. And I just created this animation as an example piece of some of the things you can do with it, but you can really do a lot of things with it. So let's take a quick look. So let's break down exactly what's going on here. So this you know, it can be a piece of paper or cloth, or, you know, it's not really, I guess it wasn't really meant to be anything, but I wanted just to feel like it was really truly displaced in 3D space, which is why I started with it from the side here, and then, you know, have it pull away to reveal another one below, and then finally the logo, and, you know, see here how it you know, how it wrinkles up. And the other thing worth noting is these cards here were created with the new version of Particular 2, and since that's not released yet, I'm going to cover that part in a future addendum or a future tutorial. But, you know, if you're familiar with Particular, it's fairly straightforward to create an animation like this. What makes Particular 2 different is that now these cards are actually being lit and shaded by the same comp light that is shading the paper, as well as having them tumble in 3D space, in true 3D tumbling, you know, according to the motion path in the turbulence that I set to it. So I will not be covering that in this tutorial. What I will be covering is how I created the both of these sheets peeling away to reveal the logo. So let's get right to it. We're going to build this comp at 720, and there's this preset for PAL, which is 25 frames per second, but I like working at 24 because I find that's now a more universal format, as well as what films are created in, so it's more cinematic, which, if you know anything about my work, you know that I enjoy cinematic anything. Alright, so so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create the texture that is going to be the this sort of fabric, and I chose this sort of paper texture, but it can really be anything. I thought it would add a nice you know, a nice tactile feel to it. So I got this paper texture here, and I've already made it into this 1600 by 500 size. Which is an arbitrary size. It can be any size I want. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-comp it. So I'm going to choose pre-comp, and I'm going to just call this sheet 1. And I'm going to leave all attributes. That basically will keep all the dimensions and everything the same. And then I'll go into that pre-comp, and in this comp, I will add the text that we're going to have here, always something. So I'm just going to create some text, always something. Chose some lovely white type over this, so let's just scale it up. Change the font. I think I've used Helvetica Bold. And let's make it black, and then I believe I changed the transfer mode to overlay. And then I also put a curves filter, so let's go here, curves. And so I'm going to apply curves to the bottom texture to darken it up a bit, give it a little more pizzazz. So there you go. That's how I got the color. And let's go back to our comp 1 here. We're going to rename this main comp. Alright, so what we're going to do is also set up a 3D environment. So we're going to create a new camera. I always like working with 50 millimeters, so we'll choose 50 millimeter. And we will also create a null. And we're going to make that null 3D. And we're going to attach the camera to that null. So if you've seen any of my tutorials before, actually a lot of people like to work this way. By attaching the camera to the null, you have a much better way of working with it. If you go to a 2 view here, this here is the top view. So here's the camera, and here is this null that I just created. So by making the camera a child of this null, the center of rotation for this camera is the end of the point of interest. So if you look, point of interest here is at 0, 0, 0, and it will now, when you rotate this null, we'll say rotate it on Y, you can see that it's rotating the camera around that null. Okay, so that's why I do that, and that makes your life a lot easier when you're trying to work in 3D space. So let's go back to one view. And the other thing we're going to do is define a ground plane. So we're going to create a new, let's see, solid layer. And we'll call that floor. And actually we should probably make it like a grayish color. Whitish. Make it 3D. What we'll do is we'll push it back in Z. And then we actually, so the way these things work is, even though it'll be in 3D, it'll be in its own world 3D, so the order here matters. So I'm going to push the floor below the sheet. And then I'm going to just open up this scale. So it's actually, you know, behind it in Z. All right, now the sheet is what I'm going to apply. The plugin is called DigiEffects Freeform. So Freeform, DE Freeform AE is the name of the plugin. So we're going to apply that to sheet 1. So you can see it automatically sort of puts this little yellow grid on top of it. That's defined here in the grid, and this is basically how many sort of things the layer is broken up to deform. I can actually have things deform here with just with this resolution, but if I want to deform it by hand, and I'm going to show you how there's 2 ways to deform the layer. If I want to deform it by hand, it's very important that you decide this resolution at the beginning, because if you change this once you've already done some work, you're going to get some funky behavior. So I would highly recommend that you think in advance what you want to do, or just play around with it so you can actually predict. For what we're going to do, this is actually great. We don't want to go more than 2 and 2, but you can actually, as you can see here, you can keep splitting this up. And each one of these corners, see, that is a control point. So I can actually pull this control point around. As you can see, it you know, distorts the layer. And it actually works in 3D. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate this camera around on X so that we can actually see, you can see now that the floor plane in our thing. And if we come back here again and select the plugin, you can see now that I can actually pull it in you know, in actually up in 3D space. So if I rotate this now, you can see, okay, you can see how this bump here that I just pulled up is kind of really cool. As far as I know you've never really been able to do this in After Effects. This is really powerful to be able to do this, and it's like the whole gist of the effect, besides the displacement mapping that we're going to do in a minute. So, and then again, I can grab any point and just kind of tug it around. And now it looks like it's all a hard edge, but that we're going to get into sort of the 3D mesh, the 3D mesh quality. You can actually subdivide this stuff so it actually looks a lot smoother. As you can see from the example, you know, all the curves here are very smooth. I actually made that crease on purpose, but you know, all of this sort of smooth curves and stuff. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset all this stuff. 0, 0, 0, and we're gonna reset the plugin. Now, there's two basically, and I'm gonna not cover exactly everything, but what we'll do is we'll create the animation of the sheet sort of folding up, like somebody's picking it up from the middle, and then sort of blow away to the left. And then we're also gonna make it wrinkle up. So let's cover up how you would do the wrinkling up. So now that I showed you how to, and actually the reason I want 2 rows and 2 columns is because this will make easier to do this sort of picking up thing. So if I now grab this point, see, by not having so many points, and then there's there's another editing controls. You can have tangent alignment, and what that means is these sort of like handles here stay linked, see? Or if I turn this off, then they're broken, so I can actually control it. So in the case of what I want to do, I actually want to break it so that, you know, so it kind of pulls up more like a tent. But and then I can actually grab the back point. See, and by actually moving the points in the correct order, you can actually grab them all sort of on their own. And then again, move the handles so that you can see what you're doing. So, okay. But one important thing I forgot to do is you always want to set a keyframe for when it's normal, when it's flat. Well, in this case, it doesn't start flat, but if you wanted it to start flat, you really want to set a keyframe for it flat because getting back to flat might be difficult. And you do that here in Mesh Distortion under Grid. So that sets a keyframe for this. So so let's go ahead and pull this back down. Actually, I think you could probably hit reset. Yeah. So it actually did. But if you had set anything else, that would have not worked. So it's best if you set your keyframe first, bam, and then you go about setting your business. All right. So that's how you'd pull the layer apart that way. The other way is there's another control here called displacement controls. And here you can see you can have a displaced layer. And this works similar to the way a 3D displacement or a bump map works in a 3D package, or if you've ever used displacement layers, where's distort? If you've ever used displacement layers in the displacement map, it works exactly the same, but the difference is here it actually works in true 3D, and that is really powerful. So what we're going to do is create go back to the project and duplicate the sheet here. And the reason you want to do that is because you want it to have exactly the same dimensions. So I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to rename it Sheet 1 Displacement Map. And I'm going to go in here, and I can delete all this stuff. Actually, I'll show you something kind of cool. We're not going to do this, but if you, let's say, wanted to make like an embossed type, I'm going to make a solid here, make comp size, and make it 50% gray. I'm going to put it back here. All right, and I'm going to actually make this type white. Okay, so now I'm going to come back to our main comp, and under the freeform plugin, I'm going to make the displace layer be, I need to add the this comp I created. I'm going to add it and turn it off so it just exists as in this environment. Go back to my plugin and choose the displacement map as the displace layer. And if you see the displace height, how it's actually displacing now. Now it looks a little rough, and actually look, it's actually displacing in gray. Let me see if I make this black. Sorry, I get confused with forms sometimes. Oh, it's set to overlay. Duh. Okay, great. So let's go back to our main comp and try our displacing. Yeah, okay, so sorry. Form works with gray as the middle point, but this plugin uses black as the bottom. All right, so now notice how it's all nasty and not very pretty, and that's because I need to up the mesh subdivision. So let's go ahead and pump this up a little bit, and then just crank this up to, like, say 300. So you can see now I'm gonna rotate it around so you can see a little better. Now once you do that, of course, this is sort of like turning up the resolution on anything. It slows things down. So let me bring it down and move the camera to where we can see what's going on. So now I'm going to also move the position of the null so that it moves kind of closer to where we can see what's going on. Alright. Alright, so there she is, and now we can up this resolution. Let's go like 500. And then that's actually very, very interesting, but obviously I'm displacing it a whole bunch, so I'm just gonna do something subtle. And let's actually get in a little closer so we can see really. Alright. So now let's go ahead and up this to 500. And you can see now that the race type, now we actually want to add a light, so that when we have a light, let's go ahead and do a point light at 100%. It actually, the light, the comp light also affects this plugin, which is really great. As you can see immediately now we have shadow from the light, so you can see how it's got this really killer raised surface. So that right there could be a really cool use that would have been impossible or very difficult to do in After Effects before. Alright, so I digress, but I hope that you guys are learning stuff along the way, and how, to different ideas of what you could do with this new functionality. So let's bring this mesh subdivision back to a workable amount, 30. And in the displacement map, instead of displacing this text, I'm going to turn that off. On the solid, I'm going to apply fractal noise. Oops. And what we're going to do now is we're going to create the ripples. And essentially, if you were thinking about the way I displaced the type, white is up and black is not up. So I'm just going to basically draw what would be ripples. So I'm just going to stretch this out so that, see how now this looks like it could be ripples. I'm going to lower the complexity so that I don't have as many sort of details. Let's go to like 2. Alright, see? I think, yeah. There you go. So now you can even see how it looks like a piece of like silk cloth. So if we go back to our main comp and increase our displacement height, oops. Alright, and then again, it's rough, but if I up the subdivisions to like say 300, you can see now we gotta have this sort of like wavy pattern displacement. And what's really cool about this is it actually works. So I'm gonna reset all this stuff here, 960, 360, oops, 0. Again, don't forget to lower this mesh subdivision so that things work snappier again. So 360, 0, 0, and 0. And we'll go ahead and let's see, rotate it on X so we see it from the side. So as you can see here, it's actually displaced, yeah. And then we can also use the other controls that we were using before to additionally displace it. So it's kind of, this is sort of the whole gist, is that I can actually create by hand displacements and then by texture map, because to have hand animated this ripple would have been impossible. Because see, here now I can actually animate, if I animate the evolution, set a keyframe, let's go down in time, like 10 seconds. You can see here, this is just, by just rolling this around, let's preview this real quick. So that's a little slow, let's go ahead and add a few more. Alright, so that right there makes it sort of randomly go up and down, and then you can also, if you wanted it to say ripple in one direction, you could just animate the offset turbulence. So if I go to 0 here and set a keyframe, and then come over here and just literally see, you can just roll this thing around. So like that. So now it's gonna both do its in undulating as well as rippling from left to right. So if we come back out to the main comp, and we'll go ahead and up the resolution just a little bit, but not too crazy. Let's say 100, and let's go ahead and ramp preview this. All right, so there you go. Now you can see how cool this just looks. Just very quick, like default fractal noise settings. We now have this rippling cloth with the text and the little up and down that that I did by hand. So to get basically this animation that I did here, of this sheet sort of coming in and then picking up, I'm going to animate it. Well, first I have a sort of a bit of a fancy camera move, but I will leave that as a homework for you guys to sort out. I'll have it animating, and I'm just going to do the first reveal. This is just the same. It's a repeat of the other reveal. I'm going to animate. First, I'm going to animate. Let's lower this again. So we'll animate the camera so that when it starts, we'll go ahead and first we'll set our finishing point, like let's say at 4 seconds. We'll finish with it on top, and we want to go in a little bit because this will be removed, right? And let's see, the floor, we'll leave that at 0 actually. Okay. That was just me resetting the size. I think I scaled it up too much, but that doesn't matter, because then what I'll do is so let me turn this off for a second. I'll bring in the AE-Tuts logo and I'll put it just right on top. I'll make a 3D layer as well, and then as long as I see the Z, which is this value here, is the same, whenever I move the layer in 3D space, they will move together. See. You can see that they're on the same plane. So that's important because that's going to basically be the ground plane, just in case you can parent it so that in case you move the floor, that it moves with it. But that's not really necessary because I'm not animating the floor. So now when I turn this guy on top, I just want to make sure that when I animate it off, it will basically leave me with that. So this is a good end camera position. So I'll go ahead and set. Notice that I'm putting all the keyframes on the null, not on the actual camera. And we're going to animate X, Y, and Z independently. And then I'll turn this on and, oops, not that one, the actual sheet. And we'll rotate back a little bit. And down. Oops. So let's go up a little bit like this. And I believe a little bit of this, so you can see now that the sheet's coming sort of towards us. And now don't worry about the floor right now, because we're actually going to turn that on as a little camera trick. So this is a pretty good angle here, and like I said, we'll turn off the floor for now. And what we can do is set a keyframe for the sheet, which we already did, for it sort of like, remember I said remember to keyframe it sort of the center, but we'll just do it by hand, because since it's supposed to be kind of a little bit sort of floaty, it doesn't really matter that it's not perfectly flat. If anything, it'll probably be even cooler. So that will set that keyframe there, and so when we come here, it's actually up, and then so all I gotta do is just go to the beginning frame and move these guys up, sort of like fold them up, and then move these guys like that, and move these guys over, and then just move these center guys down so that it's sort of like, if you can imagine, I'm kind of folding it like a taco a little bit. Alright, and that's it. Okay, so now let's take a look. See that? How it's just unfolding. And let's another thing actually I want to do is move this. Well, you know, to make it easier, we'll just make the type smaller. So that's as simple as going into the sheet and just shrinking down the type. That's the cool thing about doing this like this in a pre-comp, so that when we come out here, we just see the type. Oops. So that's pretty close. So come back to the beginning. So there we go. We have the type. And then what we want to do is at this point set a keyframe. So we set another keyframe here, because this is before we're going to actually pick it up. So maybe before, like so, and then go forward a few frames. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat the camera. So notice that there's no keyframe here. I'm going to temporarily rotate it on X. And I might have to move it down so that I can see what's going on. The idea here is that I'm going to rotate this camera so that I can see this thing from the side. Let's get away from this. There we go. So I'm just moving this null, and now I'm doing this arbitrarily because I'm actually going to delete these keyframes as soon as I'm done. But now that I can see it kind of from the side, move this. There we go. So move that down. So now I can actually select it and just do this sort of pinching thing I was talking about before. So turn off the tangents and move this up and do the tangents. And then I'm also going to move in. Now I'm going to move in these guys a little bit so that, you know, essentially because it's basically pinching it. And maybe maybe the center guy. Let's move this guy. Yeah, that's the center guy. Maybe this guy has a little bit not as pinched. You know, and doing this sort of at arbitrary places just adds a little bit of that sort of, you know, hand normal feel. So make that like that. Same with this side. Bring this up like this. Make sure that center one is in, so it kind of uses this sort of billowing kind of vibe. So now if I look here, it's going to just pinch itself. See that? And then to move, so now I've done just the deforming, but there's actually controls as well to move it around in 3D space, and that is in the 3D mesh controls. So I can actually you know, move it left and right on X and so forth. And the reason you want to do that here and not here is, first of all, this is not a 3D layer. So if I make this a 3D layer, it won't be at the edges, and it won't behave like you expect. So you want to actually control the layer here. Now there's a few limitations to this, of course. One is, for example, there's no interaction with other 3D layers. There's no shadows. You know, there's a few things that are very sort of unfortunate limitations, but you know, if you consider those limitations before you get started and you design around them, which is what I did. All right, so now once it pinches, actually as it's pinching, which is at this keyframe here, I'm going to set keyframes for position and then also for rotation. And I'm going to reveal those, U. And so that when it pinch, when it's finished pinching, and now I can actually turn off these keyframes so that now we're basically looking at it from above, right? Here, see how it's pinching? And see how it's actually going past camera. And the way I'm going to do that is, again, by, now that I have these keyframed, I can just animate this. So you can see Z is kind of coming at camera. And then I'm going to move it over to the left a little bit with X. And then keep going. And actually, I should probably push it back so that we see the edge of it as it's sort of going past camera. And that, so, and now basically it's out of the light, so that's why it's going all black. So let's move this light up. See, there you go. So it was basically crossing through the light. So I just moved the light up in Z. So now we can continue moving this guy. So there you go. Minus 700. Let's do this by hand. Minus 800. Actually, minus 700. Move it up just a bit more. Minus 300. No, minus 250. And then minus 800. Minus 225. All right. So now if we preview this, you can see here that it's going to go nicely close to camera, and we're going to catch that little tail bit, right? Let's preview this real quick. So keep in mind I haven't done any easing or anything on the keyframes, but it'll give us an idea of what it feels like so far. All right, let's take a look. Yeah, so there we go. Now we have billowing. And so what I would do now is, as it's beginning to get pinched, I'm going to add a more intense rippling. And the way I'm going to control that is in the displacement app. So I line up at the point where this is happening. And I'm going to do that by increasing the contrast, right? So the ripples are sort of higher. And I could have done that also by animating the displacement height. Displacement height here. So you can actually kind of kill birds with more than one technique. But I'm going to do this here because I'm actually going to also control a few things. I'm going to control the speed of the evolution and stuff. So I'm going to keyframe a contrast, and I'm going to go in a couple of frames here. So by this point here, I want to have it more contrasty like that. And I'm also going to set a keyframe for evolution and then sort of speed up the evolution, right? So that once it gets to this point, it's going to start going faster. And then I'm also going to stop the offset so that it actually stops moving. So it's kind of like it got picked up, so it stops, its sideways motion. As you can see here, the ripples are more intense. That might be too much, but let's take a look. So, and then also don't forget we have to up the resolution again. So let's set 150 for now. So you can see here, and if I keep going, you're gonna see even more detail. All right, looks like 150 was pretty good. 200. All right, so let's preview this now. All right. And we can actually smooth these distortion points by actually command clicking. It looks like at the end here we lose the light again. So let's move this light around. Yep. Other direction. Now the other thing we need to cover, I'm going to lower this resolution again, is at the beginning, when it comes in, we don't see the back of it, right? It's just black. I think it would be cool to see a darkened version of it. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to duplicate, and I'm going to call this sheet 1 back. And I'm going to turn off the text and just color correct it. I'm going to put levels on this guy. Levels. And just darken it by bringing in the white output level. So it's just like a darker version of the same thing. So back in the main comp, in my freeform, I'm going to go to backside controls, select the, I have to add it, sheet 1 back. Same as I did displacement map, just turn it off. And now I should be able to select it. Layer, sheet 1 back. So let's try adding another light. And we'll turn the intensity down in a minute. Let's turn this one off. Yeah. So I'm going to move it around over here. So as you can see now, by having this light come to the back, so now we can see the back. So I'm now going to lower the intensity, so just so we can darken it, so it's more like an ambient light. And so now when it comes in, see that? So now we can actually see the back, which is kind of cool. And it comes in, and when it goes out. All right, so cool. So now let's see, we're almost done. So I covered the back side, the rippling, and then so now I'll just have the logo turned on below. So now we can see how that's shaded, because that's actually being affected by the 3D lights as well. So as you can see now, we don't see them. Let's try turning off the lights. Whenever you don't see anything, you want to try turning off your lights, so that, see what's happening is I'm actually still covered by the sheet. So that means that I have to have kept going here. Minus 900, minus 1000. There we go. For some reason this slider is really sensitive in this plugin, so minus 220. There we go. Minus 225. So I just put that there. Minus 235. So now I'm actually double clicking on this keyframe so that I see the result here. Minus 250, let's keep going. Minus 300, that's too much. Minus 280, that's pretty good. We can also have it go left, so minus 300, let's keep going. Minus 500, there we go. So now we catch the edge of it. I think that's what, you know, it's a nice detail to catch that sort of tail. Okay. So now we can turn our lights back on, and we should be able to see, yeah, the A Touch logo. And then what we want to do is sort of maybe push into it a little bit. I'm gonna scale it down so we give a little bit of room to scale into it. So here we go, and now just go to the end of the animation. Just put a little bit of zooming there. And then I'm gonna easy ease. If I go to keyframe assistant, easy ease. So the camera comes to a soft stop here, and then it kind of goes, and then it pushes in. Although, yeah, and it looks like here we can actually push this down a little bit. Oops. Let's see, 50. There we go. All right, let's preview this. Actually, let's up the mesh subdivisions to, what was it? Like 150? Let's do 200. Why not? Don't forget, so now I turned the floor back on. So, yeah, okay. So at this point, when it's fully covered, I'm going to actually just trim the floor and the A Touch logo so it just kind of turns on at this point. Okay, so now we don't see it when we come in. All right, and so let's go and preview this again. Up my subdivisions. We'll do 150. And preview. All right, let's take a look. Easy ease out these keyframes. So now let's preview this. And there you go. Now it's smooth. So just by basically doing easy ease on these keyframes, now this sort of transition is much smoother. All right. So now, just a few little tweaky things just to sort of beautify it. First of all, see how there's this jagged edge? There's a setting for the amount of anti-aliasing, which is set to none now. You can go from low to high, but even the low setting seems to work pretty well. See that? I just got rid of the jaggies right there. And then there's image filtering, which I'm assuming helps filter out this sort of texture, but I don't know. I can't really tell the difference here. And then the last thing, which are these very, very optional steps. There's no built-in motion blur or depth of field to this plugin. So what I do is I use two really awesome plugins that I use on so many jobs. One is Revision Effects Real Smart Motion Blur, and the other one is Frisch Luft Lens Care. Both of them have built-in equivalents. The equivalent for Real Smart Motion Blur is Force Motion Blur, CC Force Motion Blur. So let's go ahead and show you how I apply those. I'm gonna pre-comp this whole thing. So select all and pre-comp, and I'm gonna call this setup, I guess. So I'm gonna apply. Now it's actually always better to pre-render this. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna go ahead and pre-render this and then come back. Okay, we're back. So as you can see, this render took 5 minutes and 24 seconds at best settings with multi-processing turned on. This is a Mac Pro with a bunch of RAM, so it went pretty fast. One thing to note is they've really improved the multi-processing in 9.0. This is actually the latest 9.0.2, which I highly recommend everybody upgrades if they have CS4. Mainly because it stops the scripts from crashing on Mac, which the crash never caused any harm, but it was kind of annoying that every time you quit, it said that After Effects unexpectedly quit. So they've totally fixed that. So if you use any scripts, like my background renderer or Zorro or any of those, definitely upgrade to 9.0.2. All right, so okay, so I'm gonna bring in the rendered comp and set it as a proxy for, not main comp, sorry, for the setup comp. The reason I do that is because this way I don't lose my live comp in here, but you can see now it actually, when I move it, it actually uses the rendered file. But if at any time I wanted to see the real thing, I just turn this button off, and then as you can see, it starts rendering the frame, which takes a lot longer. So using proxies is a really great way of speeding up your workflow, hence the name proxy. But I'm always surprised at how many people don't know about them and don't use them. There's one other thing I forgot to mention before we go into the last steps in this, and also see if I go into this comp, it says proxy enabled, so I can just turn it off. If you go to, one of the things is that I actually turned up the specular highlight, so it almost looks like this is like metallic-y. You know, like almost like, I don't know, very reflective silk or something. You do that by going to the plugin and then in the... Oh, you know what? Look, I left the mesh quality at 30. That's why it rendered so fast. But anyway, it looks pretty good for now. If you go to surface controls and you turn up the specular, just like in a 3D program, it just catches more specular, so it actually looks more reflective, especially when you're going into the really crinkly parts here. See how now it looks more reflective, even though it's not really reflective, but by being much shinier, it just, like I said, has that sort of silky vibe. But the defaults are actually pretty good at 50/50, but you can also lower, play with these controls to play with different looks. All right, so back to the main comp. So I'm going to turn on the proxy again. All right, so, and even though what's proxied is a pre-comp, so I can actually apply plugins and stuff to this comp, and it will actually work. So Real Smart Motion Blur. This is really easy to use. You just put it on, and it automatically calculates motion blur. The built-in one is called Force Motion Blur. And notice the difference. This is an 8-bit plugin. Real Smart Motion Blur is actually 32-bit plugin, which is very handy. So as you can see here, it basically does this really nice automatic job of motion blurring the layer. So when it's pulling away, especially here and the edges, it really kind of does a good job. Sometimes you get a little artifacting like this. You can actually, there's a pro version that actually allows you to draw a mask so that you don't get this problem. But in this case, I didn't really care because when it moves so fast, it even happens in this movie. It moves so fast that even though the artifact is there, you don't notice it when it's moving so fast. But this is what's really nice about this. And then the other plugin, I'm going to turn this off for now, is I wanted to add some depth of field. So what I'm going to do is use Frischluft Lens Care. So it's I'm going to actually see Frischluft. It's called Out of Focus. I'm sorry, Depth of Field. Lens Care is the name of the package that both of those plugins come in. So Depth of Field works with a what's called a depth layer, sometimes called a Z buffer or a depth pass. And obviously this was not created in a 3D program, so what we're going to do is we're going to fake our own depth layer. And that's simply by drawing a solid with a ramp on it. And essentially where it's black, it's going to be more blurred than where it's white. So at the beginning, I want it to be blurred sort of out here, but not here. So if I actually overlay this a little bit. Let's see this. Okay, so I basically do something like that. And I'm gonna keyframe it so it basically comes out of focus. We can actually move this in a little bit. So keyframe both of these things. So as a layer comes in, I can move this out so that the leading edges in focus keep coming. And then actually probably wants to go in focus, so let's see. Yeah, so as it's coming in, this is the focus line. We probably want to take this out as well so it feels more natural. And then once it's here, we want it to be totally white. We can actually leave, see how here there's a little bit of, just a little for dramatic action there. And then when it starts pulling away, so we'll just go ahead and move that keyframe. I'm gonna move it so that this is out of focus up here. So it'll basically, and this will be a quick exchange, right? So I probably want to move this right as it's going up. So there, so that'll be really out of focus. And then move this down. So that goes out of focus. And then technically, I mean, you probably want to put it on two separate layers, but we're doing this so quickly. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the blur to be out at this point. Yeah, I'm just going to leave that there. All right, so now that I've animated the map the way I wanted, let's bring the opacity back up to 100. And what I actually need to do is pre-comp this because we're going to call this depth pass. And then we're going to move the attributes because we want to move what we just did with the plugin. Now we can turn it off. Now we can select it as a depth pass here. If we go to the beginning and turn up the radius of the blur radius, you can see I'm going to turn it up quite a bit. You can see now how exactly how we drew our pass. It gets blurred there but not here. And then as it comes along, that sort of depth animates off like we did here. And then when it starts going away, see how this goes out of focus, but this stays in focus. And then, of course, we're really exaggerating. We're going to bring this way down, but what I'm going to do is here, when it goes away, at this point I want it to be at 0, so I'm going to put 0. I'm going to do a keyframe here. But here I want it to say be like 15. And actually, that's a pretty good amount, because 15 is probably a good amount there. So let's go ahead and preview that. So notice how adding that bit of blur, it's just really nice. Let's see. Just adds a little bit of that cinematic vibe to it. And see how when it goes away, it's so fast you don't even notice all that little trickery that you're doing. But if you look closely, it does go out of focus here, and the eye just makes it feel like it's working. By the way, the built-in equivalent to depth of field is called lens blur. Lens blur. Notice this one's 16-bit. and depth of field is 32-bit. Depth of field 32-bit, but lens blur works the same way. So I'm gonna go ahead and select the depth map layer. I'm gonna use depth path, and I think lens blur works inverted. So yeah, so see here, this is what's out of focus. So you just invert it so that the back is what's out of focus. But same result. I believe depth, the first one is faster, and it's been around longer than lens blur, so I just got used to using depth of field, and I also like the fact that it's 32-bit. I work in 32-bit a lot. But I'm gonna show you how you can just get equally nice results with the built-in lens blur. So both of those plugins are really optional steps. See, nice depth of field there. All right, but let's go back to that, and then also we're gonna turn on the motion blur, and we're gonna change the order so that the depth of field happens first, and then we'll calculate the motion blur on top of that. So let's go ahead and preview that. Okay, and let's take a look. And there you have it, our finished animation. And this is with the the subdivision set to 30, just because I want you guys to see it in full quality. I'm gonna go ahead and pause again and render it with a high resolution so you can take a look. Okay, so at 250 subdivisions, the render took 9 minutes 55 seconds, so about twice as long, which is not bad considering that we went from 30 to 250. So that's not too bad. Okay, so I'm gonna now change this the proxy to the new movie. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Now I'm gonna change the proxy, set proxy, to the one with the 1, and let's go back to the main comp. So now you can see the better, higher resolution version, and I'm gonna quickly render this. Okay, so here is the render with all the motion blur and all the goodies. So, alright, so I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and learned a few new things. I got a few new tricks up your After Effects sleeve, and see you guys next time.